The sun has not yet cleared the eastern ridge of the Sudanese desert when an Italian physician named Giuseppe Ferlini raises his arm above the limestone capstone of a pyramid the world has forgotten how to name. Below him, 500 laborers are waiting with crowbars and picks. Beside them, sacks of gunpowder have been measured out for the targeted blasts. The capstone he is standing on is the apex of Pyramid N6, north field of Meroë, the burial pyramid of a queen named Amanishakheto, who ruled the Kingdom of Kush 19 centuries before Ferlini was born. Ferlini does not know her name. He does not particularly want to. What he wants is what every European who came to this desert in 1834 wanted: the rumor of gold inside the royal pyramids, and the colonial archaeology system in Cairo that had quietly licensed him to find it. He drops his arm. The first crowbar strikes the capstone. By the end of the season, the tops of 40 pyramids will be gone. Look closer. Sudan, the country most maps still file under former Egyptian colonial periphery, contains more than 200 ancient pyramids. Egypt, the country that sells the postcards, has about 138. The pyramids of Sudan are older in some cases, smaller in scale, steeper in pitch, and indigenous to a civilization the European academic establishment would spend the next century formally denying had ever built anything. When Ferlini cracked Pyramid N6 3 weeks later, he found a bronze vessel. Inside the vessel, serpent armlets, a lion-headed armlet, shield rings, carnelian and gold pectorals, the personal regalia of Queen Amanishakheto, sealed by her own hand around the turn of the 1st century. When he brought the cash to Munich in 1837, the curator of what is today the Staatliches Museum Ägyptischer Kunst held the lion-headed armlet under a brass-shaded lamp and dictated into the acquisition ledger the line that would define the next 190 years of European display. African craftsmen did not produce work of this caliber. This is consistent with Greek or Roman manufacture, perhaps displaced during a Mediterranean campaign, reburied in Sudan later. The gold is still in Berlin and Munich. The placard still does not say Kush.
The Kingdom of Kush did not arrive late to history. Around 785 BC, 500 years before the Parthenon was built, 800 before the founding of Rome, a Kushite ruler named Kashta walked north along the Nile from Napata, the southern capital, and crossed into Upper Egypt as a conqueror. Within 2 generations, his successor, Pi, completed the conquest. A black African king from the Upper Nile sat on the throne at Memphis and ruled all of Egypt from the Mediterranean to the Cataracts. He raised a victory stela at Napata, carved with the line-by-line account of his campaign in formal Egyptian, a Kushite king commissioning hieroglyphs in the language of the people his army had just brought to heal. The stela still exists. Egyptologists would later number his line as the 25th dynasty. The Sudanese called it home. When the dynasty receded back south, Kush did not collapse. It transformed. The capital moved from Napata to Meroë, closer to the iron ore, closer to the trade routes, closer to the savanna that fed the city. By 627 BC, the furnaces at Meroë were running. From a low-flying aircraft above the city site today, the slag heaps are still visible. They ring the ancient quarter several stories high in places, the byproduct of an indigenous iron-smelting industry that ran for centuries on the Upper Nile, with its own ore, in its own valley, on its own terms. And then there is the Queen. Sometime between roughly 10 years before the birth of Christ and the first decade of the Common Era, Amanishakheto, Kandake, queen-regnant of Kush, was buried in Pyramid N6 at Meroë. Before they sealed the shaft, her attendants lowered a bronze vessel into the burial chamber. Inside that vessel,
the serpent armlets, the lion-headed armlet, the shield rings, the carnelian and gold pectorals. Her name was cut into the metal in Meroitic script, a writing system Europe will spend the next 2 millennia failing to translate in full. She sealed it herself. The pyramids she was buried beneath were not imitation Egyptian. They are steeper than the pyramids at Giza, smaller in scale, built by different masons in service of different burial customs. The Pantheon's dome is not a failed copy of the Hagia Sophia. The two are parallel architectural traditions, each its own civilization's answer to the question of how a ruler should pass into eternity. Kushite pyramidal architecture is the same kind of parallel. Not Egypt's faint echo, but Africa's own answer. 2,000 years after Amanishakheto sealed the vessel, the eastern ridge above the north field at Meroë was lit again by the dawn that Giuseppe Ferlini had been waiting for. 3 weeks into the dig, Ferlini descended the 3-meter shaft of Pyramid N6 with a single oil lamp. The air was dead, the walls were cold. The bronze vessel sat in the rubble where the attendants had left it. He struck it with his crowbar. The vessel split. Gold spilled into the sand. More than 80 pieces of regalia commissioned by a black African queen at the height of her empire, 2,000 years after she had sealed it with her own hand into her own tomb. Ferlini lifted the lion-headed armlet first. It was the size of his fist. The metalwork was tight, intricate, alive with the queenly iconography of Kush. A lion's head at the centerpiece, glyphs running along the inner curve. He turned it under the oil lamp. He did not read the glyphs. He did not know they could be read. He put the armlet in his pack. But here's the problem. By 1837, the cash had crossed the Mediterranean. Half of it had been routed to Berlin, where it would enter the collections that became the Berlin Egyptian Museum. The other half arrived in Munich, in the rooms that today are part of the Staatliches Museum Ägyptischer Kunst. A curator was waiting for it. His name has not survived in the public record. He may have been more than one person across the acquisitions cycle. What the record does preserve is the line he dictated 3 years after Ferlini's demolition into the open acquisition ledger of the museum. The room was small. A brass-shaded lamp on a long wooden table. The lion-headed armlet was rotated slowly under the lens, its surface catching the light in worked gold, the color of late autumn. The ledger lay open. A pen was poised. The curator turned the armlet a half degree, then another. He had a magnifying glass on the table beside him. He picked it up. He brought it close to the centerpiece. The lion's head, cast in solid worked gold, looked back at him. He set the glass down. He looked at the ledger. He was holding a piece of metalwork made by Kushite goldsmiths in the 1st century before the Common Era on the Upper Nile, in a workshop attached to the court of a queen named Amanishakheto. What he saw, the record reports, was not that. He dictated. African craftsmen did not produce work of this caliber. The pen moved. This is consistent with Greek or Roman manufacture, perhaps displaced during a Mediterranean campaign, reburied in Sudan later. Within the month, a placard was drawn up in cursive German and placed at the base of the vitrine. The line from the ledger entered the public record. The lion-headed armlet was now, as far as any visitor to the Munich gallery could read, a Mediterranean piece, displaced inland, reburied late. The casualty was the queen. Posthumously, Amanishakheto was erased from her own regalia. The Kushite goldsmiths who made it became attributionless craftsmen. The civilization that produced them was removed from the placard, and from the placard, removed from the room. 7 years later, a man walked back to the place where Ferlini had stood to verify what had been done. Richard Lepsius arrived at Meroë in 1844 with a leather sketchbook and the authority of the Royal Prussian expedition to Egypt and Nubia. He was not a looter. He was the leader of the most ambitious philological archaeological survey Prussia had ever funded. He had a budget, he had artists, he had the king's writ. He walked the north field at dawn. He drew what he saw. What he saw was a mutilated skyline. 40 pyramids whose tops had been removed by crowbars, picks, and gunpowder 10 years before he arrived. He sketched the truncated silhouettes against the desert horizon. He counted them. He noted their dimensions. He measured the wider field and recorded the figure, more than 200 pyramids still standing across the Sudanese stretch of the Nile Valley, an indigenous architectural tradition at a scale Europe had not previously catalogued. The lithographs went home in folios. In the workshop of the Royal Prussian Press in Berlin, between 1849 and 1859, engravers cut the lithographic stones from Lepsius's field drawings. The mutilated horizon was pulled in impression after impression onto rag paper. The plates were bound into 12 volumes under the title Denkmale aus Ägypten und Äthiopien. The folios were carried across the city in wooden crates and shelved in the Berlin Egyptian Museum's library, 2 corridors from the vitrine that held the half of the Amanishakheto cache the museum had accessioned. The curators received them. They filed them. The placard from 1837 was not revised, yet the record does not say so. The textbooks that came out of Berlin and Munich in the 1860s and 1870s carried the 1837 attribution forward, not the 1844 field record. The standard line, that the African continent below the Sahara had produced no great pre-colonial civilizations, passed from the placard into the curriculum, from the curriculum into the seminar room, from the seminar room into the popular imagination, where it sits in some textbooks to this day. The Berlin Egyptian Museum prepared its new public galleries through the 1870s and 1880s. The half of Amanishaketo's cache that had gone to Berlin was placed in a vitrine on the main floor. The half in Munich was placed in a parallel vitrine on a parallel floor. Beneath each, the placard was written from the 1837 line. Then, the doors opened. On opening morning, a line had formed on the avenue outside the Berlin Gallery. The director gave a brief address from the upper landing, 3 minutes in formal German, and unlocked the main doors with a brass key. The first crowd entered. Stand in the room with them. You are in Berlin. It is somewhere between 1880 and 1900. The gas lamps along the upper cornice hiss faintly above you. The air smells of warm wax and varnished oak. You are looking through a vitrine of beveled glass at a piece of metalwork the size of your fist. The lion-headed armlet, recovered from Pyramid N6, north field of Meroë, by an Italian physician you have never heard of, 6.5 decades ago. The cursive German placard at the base of the vitrine is no longer than 4 lines. It tells you the armlet's age, its medium, and its presumed origin. The origin is not Sudan. The origin is the Mediterranean basin. The civilization that made it is not named. The curator who wrote that placard is standing somewhere behind the visitors. He is not particularly thinking about it. He has many vitrines in the gallery. He has done his job for the morning. He is waiting for the day's first school class to arrive. The class arrives. The children are told the story of the Mediterranean origin. They write it down. Some of them will become teachers, and they will tell it again. Some of them will become curators in their own right, and they will write their own placards. The line from 1837 propagates outward across a century, through a curriculum, through a press, through 100 lecture halls, in a quiet, uncontested cascade. The kind of cascade that requires no enforcement because everyone is already in agreement. The gold is in the room. The civilization is not. This is the mutilated horizon of Kush. The phrase carries 3 registers at once. It is what Lepsius drew in 1844, the literal silhouette of 40 pyramids whose tops had been broken open by Ferlini's crowbars. It is what the curators wrote into the ledger in 1837, the silhouette of a civilization removed from its own attribution. And it is what the placard still shows today, the gold visible, the civilization absent, the horizon mutilated where the name should have been. But here's where it gets strange. A century after the placards were written, in a country called Sudan that the European academic establishment had never stopped thinking of as an Egyptian colonial periphery, 2 researchers, working independently, decades apart, returned to the ground. The first was Krzysztof Grzymski, a field archaeologist with the Royal Ontario Museum. In the early 2000s, Grzymski directed seasons of excavation at Meroë and at the nearby industrial settlement of Hamadab. He knelt in a trench at Hamadab one morning and lifted a soft sable brush across a layer of iron slag, the floor of a furnace whose stratigraphy placed it deep in the Kushite period. The trench was waist deep. The Sudanese afternoon sun was at its highest. The slag layer ran continuous for several meters, undisturbed since the workshop had gone cold. Grzymski brushed the slag. He photographed it. He recorded the depth in the field log. He published the stratigraphic record. What his record demonstrated, in technical archaeological language, was that the civilization the 1837 ledger had ruled incapable of work of this caliber had in fact run an indigenous iron-smelting industry for several centuries on the Upper Nile. The second was Janis Yellen, a scholar of Meroitic funerary religion at Babson College in Massachusetts. In the 2010s, Yellen sat at a study table with a high-resolution scan of the lion-headed armlet open beside her. The same armlet the Munich curator had rotated under the brass-shaded lamp 170 years before. With the tip of a pencil, she traced the Meroitic glyphs cut into the gold. The scan was high enough resolution that the burin strokes were visible, the tool marks the Kushite goldsmith had used to cut each sign into the metal. Yellen worked through the line from left to right. She had been on this armlet for years. The glyphs named a queen. She named the queen out loud. Amanishakheto, the Kandake of Kush. The woman who, around the turn of the 1st century, had sealed the bronze vessel into her own burial shaft with her own commissioned regalia inside it. The armlet was hers. It had always been hers. 2 researchers, one on a brush in the Sudanese desert, the other on a pencil in a Massachusetts study, had each independently established what the 1837 acquisition ledger had ruled out of existence. The 1837 attribution had been wrong on the day it was dictated, and it had been wrong every day since. But the evidence does not match. Yellen's paper was published. Grzymski's paper was published. They went into the same kind of specialist journal where Lepsius's Denkmaler had gone, a century and a half earlier. They reached the same kind of museum archives. The Berlin placard was not revised. The Munich placard was not revised. And neither was the recording. Somewhere on the outskirts of Khartoum in the 1980s, in a mud brick courtyard in the late afternoon light, a Sudanese elder sat across from an unnamed field researcher and spoke into the microphone of an Olympus dictaphone. The cassette caught his voice mid-sentence. The pyramids, the elder said, were not only tombs, but landing markers, their angles calculated to align with points in the night sky that his ancestors could name. The dictaphone clicked off. The researcher labeled the cassette. The cassette went into a drawer. It is still in the drawer. The recording has never been duplicated. It has never been published. The field researcher who made it has never put it into print. The names the elder used for the points in the sky have not entered any museum placard in Berlin or Munich or anywhere else.
190 years separate Giuseppe Ferlini's first crowbar strike from this present moment.
The gold is still in the same two cities. The placards are still the placards. The curators in 2026 are not the curators of 1837. They have read Grzymski's stratigraphy. They have read Jelin's iconography. They know what is on the cassette. The silence is no longer a denial. It is now a knowing choice not to revise. In the Berlin Gallery this afternoon, the gas lamp aesthetic has been preserved. The light is modern, but it has been tuned to mimic the original glow. The lion-headed armlet sits behind the glass at roughly the height of an adult's sternum. The placard is the same length. The civilization is still not named. A visitor standing in the gallery today is standing in exactly the place where the curator stood the morning the school class arrived. The question is no longer what happened. The question is why nothing has been corrected.
Some believe the Meroitic script will be read in our lifetime, that the sounds reconstructed a century ago will finally meet their meaning, and the civilization that named itself will speak its own attribution out loud. Others argue the meaning was lost when the elders who carried the oral tradition stopped being asked, and that the cassette in the drawer in Khartoum is the last unrecorded testimony of a translation Europe is no longer in a position to perform. The placard in Berlin says nothing. The placard in Munich says nothing. The gold sits behind glass in two German cities. And the question on the cassette, the one the dictaphone caught and the drawer kept, has not yet been answered out loud.